There is something I've been sitting with for a while, and I knew this episode would come, but I did not want to rush it because this isn't something you say lightly. Not everything spiritual is safe. And if you've been in a space or around a person or inside an experience that looked like light, but something in your body said no, this episode is for you. Some of you listening, I feel you. Not because we've met, but because you've already reached out to me, or you've been thinking about it. Maybe you've seen me in town and almost said something, or maybe you did stop me and we chatted. And I would like to say thank you for that, because there's something in your life or in your past that didn't fully feel right. You didn't have the language for it. And I want you to know you are not imagining that. This is Spirit and Scrutiny podcast, where we explore the sacred with open hearts and discerning minds. I am your host, Flower. I think a lot of us enter spirituality with a kind of openness, a willingness to trust, to believe, to soften into something bigger than ourselves. And there is really something quite beautiful about that. But there's also a belief that quietly forms underneath of it. That if something is labeled as spiritual, it must be safe, it must be trustworthy. And that is where things can begin to blur. I want to talk about the kind of moment where something is labeled as healing or spiritual or expansive. And yet, your body begins to tighten. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that you notice it. And then maybe you explain it away because you have been told this is growth, this is ego death, this is what healing feels like. So you stay, you override, you try to trust what's in front of you more than what's happening inside of you. And hey, I myself have been there. I know exactly what it feels like to want something to be right so badly that you silence the part of you that knows it isn't. And that part stays with you. It isn't always the experience itself. It's the moment you didn't listen to yourself. Because later, there's often this quiet realization of, I knew. Even if you didn't have the language, even if you couldn't explain it at the time, something inside of you was aware. And that can be a really hard thing to sit with, not in a shameful way, but in a way that shows you how deeply you can feel and how often that you've been taught not to trust that. There is something I would like to share that actually happened very recently. And I'm not going to go into the details, but I have found myself in a space that was meant to be safe, meant to be spiritual, and something in my body did not agree. And it wasn't loud. It honestly would have been easier if it was. But it was subtle. Just enough that I noticed it barely, and just enough that I could have ignored it. Because that is a place I know really well. That edge where you can still convince yourself that what you're feeling isn't actually real. And I could feel both directions inside of me. The part that wanted to stay because it was familiar, because it became convenient, because I did not want to have to disrupt anything. And the part that knew something wasn't right, not dramatically wrong, but not honest either. And staying with that without rushing to decide was really fucking uncomfortable. Because I could not hide from it. I could not call it something else. I could not spiritualize it. I couldn't make it mean growth just to stay. And I could feel the moment where I almost left myself again. Not by physically leaving, but by choosing to stay in something that didn't feel right because it was easier. And that is the pattern. Not always chaos. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like staying and calling it alignment. And I could feel that version of me right there, ready to take over. And this time, I did not let her. I stayed with what I was feeling long enough for it to become undeniable. And when it became clear, there wasn't really a decision anymore. There was just honesty that this is not for me. And so I chose to leave, even though it would have been a hell of a lot easier for me to stay. And what stayed with me after wasn't the situation. It was the fact that I didn't abandon myself to stay in it. And I do think that is something that isn't talked about enough, is that a lot of us come into spirituality without a strong relationship to our own bodies. So instead of becoming more sovereign, we actually become more suggestible. We are taught to trust the teacher, to trust the process, to trust the energy, but not always to trust ourselves. And this is where things start to blur. Not because everything that feels intense is transformation, not because everything that feels uncomfortable is meant for you either. And not everything that calls itself safe actually is. Safety in spirituality is not about how beautiful it looks, how many people follow it, or how it is explained to you. It is about what your body can actually hold. It is about whether you are allowed to stay connected to yourself, or whether you are slowly being taught to leave yourself behind. So, what does safe spirituality actually feel like then? Safe spirituality feels like choice. Safe spirituality feels like space. It feels like you can say no without consequence, without pressure, without having to justify it. Safe spirituality feels like your body is included in the process, not overridden by it. And what doesn't feel safe, even if it is subtle, is anything that rushes you, pushes you, or asks you to abandon your own knowing in order to receive something. If something is truly aligned for you, it will not require you to disconnect from yourself to access it. If you've been sitting with something like this, where part of you knows, but you haven't fully let yourself listen yet, I just want to say, you don't have to rush that. Learning to stay with yourself in those moments is a real process. Especially if you have spent a long time being taught to override what you feel. It takes time to recognize the difference between discomfort that's asking you to grow and discomfort that is asking you to pay attention. And that's okay. If you are still learning that, I am too. There is nothing wrong with you for not having trusted yourself sooner. It took me a really long time to trust myself. And once in a while, I still don't now. But what matters is that you're starting to notice more. You're starting to feel what is actually yours and what is not. And at that moment, where you pause instead of override, that is where something new begins. You don't need to have all of the answers. You don't need to make a perfect decision. You just need to stay with yourself long enough to hear what is true. And if this is something you're in, or something you're starting to recognize, just know there are spaces where you don't have to leave yourself to be supported, where you are allowed to move slowly, to question, to feel, and to come back into your body at your own pace. Take a breath with me now. Inhale slowly through your nose. Exhaling gently through your mouth. Whatever came up for you in this episode, you don't have to solve it right away. Just choose to stay close to yourself. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Spirit and Scrutiny podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and stay in a relationship with the body that carries you.